Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Invercargill City Council workshop, looking ahead to LTP, looking at city centre vibrancy. I'm Darren Ludlow and I'll be chairing this process today. We do actually have apologies from Mayor Clark and also Tom, I think. Those are the only ones I've had, but it is a workshop, so we just note that. So this workshop is being live streamed in accordance with the principles of open and transparent decision making. So while we accept that councillors will have their own view on many matters, and in many cases might already have views on what the right answer to an issue is, you are not required to approach every decision as though you've given it no prior thought or have no existing knowledge or opinion. However, you are required to keep an open mind, and you must be prepared to change or adjust your views if the evidence or arguments warrant it. That means you need to take care with that what you do or say doesn't make it look like you've already made your decision before you've considered all the relevant information and evidence, and that might include after the workshop's ended. So a reminder to the public that no decisions are made here. However, there might be a preference arrived at the end of the workshop. This only becomes a decision actually once we get to the council meeting at the other end of the process and all relevant decision-making information is presented there in an open forum. There is no public involvement in these workshops. It's a chance for councillors and mana whenua representatives to discuss matters. Public consultation will follow, and that engagement is always open. There's also the Let's Talk platform, and there's a link to that in the description beneath the live stream video. So to proceed that, we have a workshop. The workshop helps shape the document that we will put out for public consultation. Then we receive that public consultation, and then in an open manner, we make those decisions considering everything at an open council meeting later on. That's the simplest way of explaining it. Are there any questions at this point? If not, thank you, welcome, and Rhiannon, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Kia ora, councillors. I'm just going to work out how to get the slides moving. Okay, so we have quite a few topics that you as councillors and the Mayor wanted to discuss today. As we look at the first topic for the long-term plan, what further investment, if any, do you as councillors want to consider as you work towards your vision, our city with heart, he nā kau aroha in the city centre? So as officers, we've just tried to divide up the conversation into two parts for you. The first part talking about place, so the physical infrastructure of the city centre, and then the second topic talking about people. So obviously a lot of investment has gone into the city centre through the last long-term plan. And so you may well be now wanting to turn your attention to how do we best activate and make a success of that city centre. So you can see the topics for discussion up there on the screen. Yes, just to follow on from what the chair was saying, this process feeds into a number of different parts of the long-term plan. So from this conversation today, we as officers will take some direction from you and then bring more further information forward to future workshop on strategic projects, to papers for decision to council, into the LTP consultation document itself. So before we kick into the conversation, just a brief reminder on where we're at in the whole process. We've begun the strategic decision making part of the process. You'll recall you agreed all the workshops you wanted to hold through this year at the end of last year, and this is the first of those. Behind the scenes, the staff are working on the various components that go into the long-term plan, primarily the infrastructure elements and the budget elements all coming together to support those workshop conversations. So we will be in a position probably to start those public part of the conversations, the informal pre-engagement, around May, June time. So the key question for this workshop, what should you prioritise in working towards that vision? And just a reminder that any new activity not already in the plan will require additional investment of some sort on impact rate. So just something to have in the back of your mind through the conversation. So I've probably already covered off this slide, just a reminder that one of your strategic priorities is city centre renewal and the development of the city centre master plan to support the council's investment, as ICL has really taken place through the last long-term plan and underpins this decision making today. So the first topic, I'm handing back to you, Chair Russell, is going to talk about City Centre Street Stage 1 briefly before you guys can talk further about what you want for Esk Street.
Welcome, Russell. Welcome, John. Again, thank you very much for giving up your time to be a part of this process. I know it's not an insubstantial amount that you've given to us so far through this, and we appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm talking about Esk Street and Place, and I guess we've focused a little bit on Esk Street, but this is really starting to have that conversation that we've seen Esk Street come to light over the last couple of years, and I think it's a really good opportunity to say, how are we going to use this and recognise what that place forms in our city. We also need, and I've highlighted a number of areas here that Esk Street also has access for many other purposes other than just, I guess, the people. So we have underground car parks. We also have need for people to be able to get in and get dropped off for people who can't necessarily walk distance. So I guess we've got to keep all those things in perspective. There is an opportunity that we've got some play elements already in Esk Street for the kids to play while they're there with their families. I think that's a good opportunity to sort of recognise. And there's quite a lot of discussion in later slides about how we make sure that vibrancy is retained and used, because Esk Street is starting to look really great, but we've actually got to make sure it keeps delivering the purpose of. And I guess in this area, just the last piece is to make sure that it is actually, we continue to understand how these streets link together and how we don't lose that, I guess, that opportunity to make sure that Esk and Don become part of a city heart rather than just streets that are individual. And I guess that's where the linking. Happy to have any questions on Esk Street at a high level.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's high level actually. Some of the play elements along Esk Street, when I've been down there, I've noticed that they could be quite a serious health and safety risk for elements of our public, such as our blind people. So in that development of that space, was there consideration for this?
Each of our stages, we've had a independent audit undertaken by the Jones Group, which is the SEPTED, which is the there, but we will continue to monitor those areas. So some of the play elements we refer to are in the garden areas, so the kids can actually climb on the blocks rather than necessarily stomp on the plants, I guess.
Yes, I understand that, but is there, like, if someone's walking and they're blind, they have no prior warning to an area of where they would expect stable grounding. So is there like elements there that could improve that for them?
Certainly on the north side we have a tactile band, and I guess that's the effort that's made, and that's been used consistently by designers elsewhere in the country. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Ryan. Any others at the moment? No? Thanks, Russell. That was easy.
That was easy.
You've brought us back into time. Ahead of time.
Rhiannon's asked me not to be too long. So, next slide, please, Rhiannon. So the second part of, I guess, my presentation this morning on place is about the master planning. When we started the master plan for the city centre some 2.5 years ago or more, we really focused on the sort of the blocks with DT, Don and Kelvin as the hub. And what's been, I guess, we've started to see is with some further development and further investment by other parties, it expand out a little bit. So we've been looking with Isthmus again how our master plan could expand out a little bit, and actually what does it tell us, and how do we deal with it, and obviously with Distinction Hotels developing the old Menzies building in Lower East Street, there are some questions about how you might access that area and what their needs are, and I guess that's still evolving. So what we've done is tried to test a little bit about how we would get access into Lower Esk Street, because at the moment the only access is from Levin Street, which for a hotel makes it a little bit difficult. So I guess this slide really just starts to raise some of those questions about what do we want to do in that area of their city. How will a hotel link and relate back to our city with heart, which is Esk Street? If you come out the doors, how do you see, what does it look like? How do you get vehicles in and out of their area? So I guess this is really the starting point for us to contemplate what might happen in that area. So Rhiannon, perhaps we just go to the next slide, then we take some questions.
Worth remembering, I guess, Russell, that is and always has been road, sits as road reserve.
That's correct. We physically stopped some of it, but it still is road. So really, I guess what that sort of links clearly onto in the next stage is actually what purpose does Wachner Place serve going forward, and how might we use that in conjunction with any other development to actually link those areas to the city centre. And so I guess the options that have been started to be tested are, what is the purpose of it? Is it used as a public space? Does it return to a street with some form of building on or around by people? Or do we actually create it as a bigger development? So I guess that's the sort of the wider test of seeing just beyond our initial works in Esk and Don Streets. It's actually, how does this actually start to grow over time, and how does this actually relate to the wider city centre?
I've always seen it as a people place. It's where people gather. It's where events have happened a lot. It'd be sad if there was any sort of shift.
Yep. It's also worth bearing in mind that in some of the public consultation that we've done in the past, that there's been very clear feedback that a lot of people don't necessarily feel safe in there either, which is something that council's tried to deal with. Grant.
Have we discussed or engaged with the developers, particularly in relation to how transport plays a part of their development?
We've started that conversation. I've met with Jeff Thompson and talked, and we just still need to carry on because their development's evolving, and so will our plans evolve.
Yeah.
But I guess the clear message that people walking out of a hotel are going to want to be able to see Esk Street. So what happens next, I guess, is really what this conversation is starting to be.
It's the functionality of what we need to design there, right? Is the first question. The second thing I have around the public space, and historically Wachner Place has been that, but when you look at where we've now developed with ICL, and in my head I wonder why, other than the people perhaps in the motel, why they're going to head that way, and are they more likely to head west? North and link up Dawn Street in a pedestrian manner. Which comes back to a question around what linkages do we have between Esk and Dawn? Are they vehicle and pedestrian, or are they predominantly pedestrian? So I'd like to see some more information about how a city centre can be formulated around the need and that mix of pedestrian usage versus vehicle usage, and then also around that importance to have a public space somewhere in the mix there, and bring all that to the table before we make any decisions.
Evelyn?
So as a person who remembers when it used to be a street and there were businesses down it, may I say that I have two thoughts about this. We're proposing to change because
the use of a building is changing. I'm not sure that's the best reason to actually change Wachner Place, because unless Esk Street becomes really pedestrian only, there is not going to be a safe gathering space in our city with heart. I take on board that not everybody always feels safe in Wachner Place, but that's the same wherever you go, where from time to time people decide to make a space their personal place and unsafe for other people to be in, and we need to resist that. But to change it because the use of a building at the lower end of that street is changing isn't necessarily the best for all the citizens of the city. It might be best for that business. And I think we probably need to consider whether there are other things that we can do that make Wachner Place a safer public gathering space, or whether we are going to have to look at what the alternative is, which to me would be making Esk Street pedestrian only, and how much appetite there is for that, we're not sure. So that's just my initial thoughts, but because I'm a walker, I'm not necessarily hung up on the idea of where cars can and cannot go. I seem to navigate the city reasonably well as a person who walks places, and maybe it's just that we need to actually think about some places are more for people who walk rather than cars.
Can I just...
No, sorry. Erin.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a clarification just around, I guess, the driver for doing this mini master planning edition. It's definitely not around simply the change of the use of the building, of that use changing. It's very much more around that when we went back to the original intent for the master planning work, it was around how do we try to support investment in the city. And that was very much around when council decided to put the money in for obviously the investment of ILT in the Langlands, the investment in ICL. We did look obviously around the investment that SIT were doing. It's been sort of a key consideration as to whenever there's a major investment in the inner CBD, how does council look at how we support and interact with that investment? So I guess I just wanted to take us back to that original intent of the master plan. And also the fact that to keep in mind that although it's not a permanent public space in Esk Street, we were very conscious of trying to develop quite a large gathering events space in the centre of Esk Street. And we do have the bollards at the end there, and the intention, at least of staff, and we'll obviously take direction from elected members, is that we would quite frequently look to close that off and hold events within that public space as well. Although I acknowledge the fact that that doesn't make it a permanent meeting space.
Thanks. Trish, then Grant.
I like the idea of drawing people in to the place that we've developed. So we've got the Esk Street, we've got the building, the mall building. I would like to think that we could draw people this way and that way, so that it's actually attractive. It's sort of like it's a place that perhaps I don't go, but it may be if there was some art or some kind of visual stuff. And it was rather than a static space, it was a place that people would be pulled further into the rest of the our development.
Grant, then Rhea, then Leslie.
Yeah, and thanks, Erin. I think that is a really important principle that we need to remember, that we're trying to encourage and foster investment in the city, and so we need to take very serious consideration of that when we do this. So yeah, I'm pleased you've raised that point. I still think though we've got to be flexible around, there are other options around where we create public spaces which are more closely linked to the investment we've made and link in. That isn't just Wachner Place. So I think we've got to really look to our officers to bring some options to us, and they might appear a little bit bold, but I think there are those options around if we're really trying to develop up a public space that we can have, events that support the investment that not only we've made, but also businesses have made, like ILT and the Thompson Group. So.
Rhea?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We know that historically this particular area has always swung around when there's been mood of councils and public to change where that or those areas of function to our city or heart of our city have been. So what I'm thinking of is a classic example of Christchurch, and we have an area of the Bridge of Remembrance, and we have people that can utilise that area and have different types of public interactions and events going on there. There are other town areas too where they have the space difficulty of deciding what to do with, is it completely accessible by vehicles or not. My preference, since being here since I was 13 years old, is to try and keep some of that uniqueness to Wachner Place, but modernise it for business potential growth, so that we aren't and are not cutting off any future businesses that could be established along that corridor from the hotel from having foot traffic. I do think we do need to bear in mind the service vehicle needs for surrounding businesses currently. And I take on board what Darren said. It is and can at times become a safety issue. But if we address the existing problems to make it an attractive area, we may very well see our public actually buying into this and making sure that our community is actually safer overall there. So I'm excited to see some vision, some future visions, and how we can link our hotel into our main area. And that's all.
Can I just clarify, Rhea, that whilst that might be your preference, your mind remains open?
Yes, and yes, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you for that. Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Other people have said some of what I was going to say, but I'm just interested, I suppose, from a practical point of view, if we're going to explore option 2 any further, that we have quite a bit of information on what that would mean for the state highway flow, for instance. What it would mean from the point of view of the length of time to achieve that, because it would include some, just looking at the arrows, it would include some fairly massive deconstruction, possibly including the large structures in the middle of the state highway at the current time.
The pillars of strength.
Yeah, so I'm quite interested in, for option 2 to be very much fleshed out as to the actual reality, the relationship with the state highway, whether it would achieve that effect, and also with option 2, I would like it fleshed out for alternative public spaces, because option 2 would definitely invite us to have a very clear council plan on what was the alternative town square.
So Russell, Leslie raises a good point, but currently it's a controlled intersection anyway, just not necessarily for vehicles coming out of Esk Street, correct?
That's correct. We've got a pedestrian crossing in that space. So, and I guess that's what the previous slide sort of started to test some of those vehicle movements. And
yeah, I'd just like it to be tested a bit more, Russell.
And I guess the slides were really to bring some options and I guess create a conversation. John Green might.
Yeah, well, thank you. Segue. Good morning, everyone. And I'm here, I guess, as capacity of chair of the City Centre Governance Group. I just want to stress that group, which was formed to assist council with the development of the master plan, has A, no budget, and B, no decision-making authority. So it's advisory or representational only, but along the way, since early 2020, we have acquired quite a bit of insight and IP around this process, so hopefully we have something to contribute to it. I think it's probably worth just recapping a little bit where Erin was. The master plan brief originally, of course, was a very tight area, and that was partially in response to the fact that a proliferation of projects around the city meant that we did a lot of things but didn't do them well, and we were spread too far, and that's a fundamental part of the master plan. So it is a fairly tight area, and of course it's been exciting to get the first stage done of Esk and Don pretty near finished. and we've been here a number of times talking about what next. So again, keen to be part of this process. But I think one thing has come clear is it was never intended that the master plan or the upgrade of the city or rejuvenation of the city would live solely within that area. And so it's quite exciting to be starting to talk about the other side of D in particular, because we've said all along is we've got good permeability from the north, we have good permeability into the city centre from the east, but from the south it's not so good, and from the west it's difficult with D. So we do need to think about how we bring that into the conversation. So it's good to be having that conversation. In respect to Wachner Place, I think it'd be fair to say our group, they will all have a range of ideas, but probably if we got up a little bit, we would say we need a meeting place, we need a people place, but is that the best place to have what I might otherwise call a town square? And I think most people, while they don't want to lose Wachner Place from having the meeting capacity that it has now, it's probably not the best location for a town square, but I would equally understand if people didn't want to give it up unless they knew what they were going to get. But I think if we were just putting it out there, we would say ideally the town square would be even more centrally located away from that heavier traffic route. So I know there's some sites under consideration, but of course, that's tricky at this stage. But I think that's part of the conversation. The next part, in terms of just looking at these, which the guys have developed, and again, our group hasn't had a chance to consider these or discuss them yet, but we have a saying, when we understand our options, we make our best decisions. And I think that's probably the next piece of work, is we need to bring some of these now to life and put them up there and say, what does it really look like, taking into account the traffic considerations. The thing we always forget about, what's under the ground. If some of this work has to be done anyway, and some of these streets have to be worked on anyway, then the question is, what are we going to put back on top of the work when it's done? So there's a bit of work around prioritisation, a bit of work around what areas need to be disturbed, but our perspective, I guess, as a group, more than anything else, is to maintain the momentum, retain the IP to the best knowledge as we can with continuity of people and resource, and let's put what we've already done to work. So let's just not stop at Esk and Don, but let's link them together, and then let's start thinking about, how much more could we do? Where is the opportunity? And the opportunity is always about people. It's not about buildings. It's about people.
Thanks, John. Barry?
Yeah, I respect that there's going to be a lot of money spent by Mr. Thompson with the Menzies building. I'm just a bit concerned about the going north from that building, all the derelict buildings that are there. Is there any plans for that?
He has plans for those.
Yeah.
Is he?
But
Yes, they form part of his development.
Okay.
I think the point that was made over here before was, we've said from day one through master planning and then into stage one that council cannot do all this on its own.
No.
And the idea is to do it to the work we do to a standard that gives the private investors confidence in the plan, and it becomes a catalyst for ongoing investment from the private sector. The job is too big for council alone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just following on from, through you, Chair, what you just said and what Erin said, it may well be that Esk Street becomes a meeting place closed off for particular events. So that could be, even if it was just temporary, at nights and things or weekends, that perhaps it could be a way of pulling the people in, but also having a space for people to gather, possibly.
Yeah, I think the ideal would be, I said, some form of town square size appropriate to for our population. Where do you go to have your lunch? Where do you meet the family?
Yeah.
Where do young mums stop and feed their kids?
Yeah.
Lunch because they're in town shopping. I mean, that would be the ideal. It needs to have a north-facing aspect. It needs to be warm. Needs to be safe. There needs to be a lot of people around, and ideally it has facings on to retail that is also activated by the people being there. Now, you can't always get exactly what you want or the perfect solution, but I think there are solutions and opportunities for solutions to that effect. and I think in the main they would be more biddable as spaces than the one we've got.
Thanks. At the end of that piece, Russell? Gosh, we're making great time.
Great.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, John.
Cheers, thank you.
Yeah, I'll put that here.
Which brings us to urban play. Mr. Gibbling, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors.
Morning.
So, this possibly touches on a point that Councillor Dermody raised a little bit earlier in the conversation around it's a package. You know, it's not just one solution. And one of the things that have been talked about quite some time is what is destination play, and we've debated that, and we haven't quite landed on the position. And so what the team are working on at the moment, and I'm just going to give you a run through of our plan and then probably seek some guidance and feedback from you as to what are the things that you want to see when we talk about urban play, in terms of location, in terms of activity, in terms of who we're attracting, who we're not attracting, in terms of safety, all of those elements. So I'd love to get that feedback from you after I've given you a bit of a run through about how we're going to approach this. So we've got a really good working partnership with Active Southland, and so we've talked with Vanessa Huey, who's the new CEO there, and she's agreed to chair a small working group to develop a scoping document that we can then send out to the sport, recreation and play market in the aim of attracting a consultant that will help us write a feasibility report. And that will basically provide us later this year with a range of options, costed. You can then make the call on which balance of capital versus operating cost that you would like to see in order to create a sense of vibrancy through play in the CBD. The purpose of the group and the purpose of the work, well, firstly, just a starting point to say what's the value of play and why are we doing this? And from a sense of place, and with the investment that council and a number of commercial partners have put into that area, is that this is about attracting people and keeping people in our city and keeping them engaged, not just purely on retail, but providing another draw to bring people in because it's an exciting and it's a safe and it's an engaging place to hang out. We want to understand what the value of play is in that sense, both from its own intrinsic well-being benefits of physical activity, of mental well-being, all of those elements about what individuals get out of play, but also from a slightly broader economic point of view, is what could the community around it expect if we get this right? So we want to understand that. Secondly, we want to look at, for us, and I think this is where council needs, this is where we need to get more clarity, is what are our options to deliver play? Do we invest in one massive piece of infrastructure and hope that that brings people in? Or, as you've talked about over the last 3 or 4 months, the idea of digital or nodal play, do we start spreading pockets of play throughout, whether it's a piano or whether it's a table tennis table or whether it's swings, or how does that look and what does the mix look like? Or do we not invest in any capital whatsoever, and do we invest in people, and do we ask people to run events and create events? And so there's a mix of, you know, one big capital investment through to an ongoing operational commitment around salaries, wages and event costs. So that's what one of the real clear areas we've got to get in our head. I think everyone on the same page to understand what play is, and then to understand how we're going to implement play in the CBD and why. So that's about all I want to say, and hopefully my leading questions at the start have given you a bit of time to think, what does play look like for you, and what do you want to see, and how do you want us to reflect that in a scoping document to bring back to you in terms of advice?
Thanks, Steve. Personally, I think it would be interesting to see some information around a mix of digital, because that's where parts of the world are moving, and it's certainly a way of trying to engage with young people who've told us that's what they want. But I think also nodal play spaces, spreading where the activity happens rather than having something of the likes of the Margaret Mayhew playground where there is a centre where you see activity. If you're seeing more activity spread out, I think that's got to create a larger space of vibrancy, not only for what we're developing in the streetscapes, but also as a benefit for the retail activity that surrounds it and attracting people, not just to one space, but to more spaces. So we're not just favouring those who've centred in one area of say, Esk Street, for example, but wider than that, and even potentially looking as we look to push out, where can you engage with things in Don Street and Tay Street. Again, not all of that needs to be hardware, because it's not cheap. And we've also seen through some of the work that Active Southland and Healthy Families have done that there are portable methods of play. There is a play container that started off in Esk Street during the first part of during the demolition phase, which is currently sitting at South Alive, I think, from memory, and it's great for engaging people of all ages. So that's just one thing I think it's worth looking at. Grant, was that a...
Yes, it was, yeah.
Thanks.
You framed that really well, Steve, I think, and I think in my mind we've got a really great example in a different context around how the stadium is so multifunctional, and so it's been created as a sort of a facility that pretty much anything can happen. World Cheering Champs, horse dancing, lemon concerts, you name it. And so in my mind, I think that's the challenge for us, to try and create something in our city centre, and to pick up what John said around, it's a mix of, you can go to have lunch with family, you can have open air food halls, you can have small pop-up youth concerts, because that's what our youth have said they want. You could have parkour competitions, and you could have the world's Swede weighing competition in there annually. So, to me, in terms of our function in council, it's following the model that we've got with the stadium, and creating an area that can be transitioned through a number of functions for our community, and the output and the benefit to the community, I think, in terms of, do we operationally fund it? Our social engagement and the glue we're gluing back our society and our community, I think, is one of the key priorities for us. And so, I think if we create a facility like that, it is so functional and able to be used in so many different ways by so many parts of our community, I think we will achieve that, that re-knitting of our community, which has been fractured, in my view.
Pania?
I actually like the idea of, support both what you're saying, because if we can create smaller hub type spaces that sort of connect, like there's a trail, there's a challenge, there's, that movement around the town, I think, to me, that's how, I think that would be more beneficial than having a centre spot.
Evelyn?
Oh, kia ora, Mr. Chair. I've been thinking about the difference between the hardware type thing and the more spontaneous or people activated things. But I'm also really aware that things like the play pods, the table tennis table that was outside auction house, chessboards, those sorts of things have been really popular in the past. The issue with them is the person who's responsible for packing them up at night to make sure that the pieces don't go home with other people, and we only have 15 of something instead of 16 or whatever. But I'm a little bit resistant to the more extreme, what I think is more extreme, of recreating a playground, such as having swings and things like that, because there's other health and safety implications with that. So things that are more easily transportable, that can be in one street one day and a different suburb the next day, or something like that brings people to engage with the spaces, but isn't restricting of other people's engagement with the spaces, which I think is where I probably have concerns with something like swings and those sorts of things. But I do see, I have to say, the children really engaging with the wooden pieces of the cityscapes, and I saw a little boy learn to jump off with the help of his whānau the other day, and I thought it was actually quite interesting seeing how it activated the whole whānau to be part of that child's development and growth, and that we provided the opportunity for that to happen in the middle of our streetscape. So I just wanted to mention that. But for me, it was what I've enjoyed is seeing people engage with things like the table tennis table, and I love the idea of a piano somewhere.
Rhea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, you asked the question of what's the value of play, and for me, it's never capped in terms of our community and the needs of our families here. Some of the ideas that you've put forward and people have discussed around the table over the last few months have been really amazing ideas, because it draws our families back into our city. It brings them back into our community. One of the things, too, as Evelyn touched on, is actually building the confidence of our youth to do different things and be interactive in our city. One of the things I've noted that's been quite a small but interesting sort of trend in different areas is the orientation play aspects, and it's designed to different age groups. We had the Pokemon one years ago that just grabbed all sorts of ages. So if we
Still is.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. That's good. But something like that challenges the individual's mind, that not only are they seeing things like play of instruments around the city, but they're also in the orienteering phase discovering new things about our city on a question that could be a virtual competition. So I think that's quite a good idea to bring those elements in. As we know, less children are outside playing now in our parks, so we can kind of encourage that youth to their parents, their grandparents, and bring them into the city. A few years ago, there was a light display in different areas of the city that people just in their hundreds came out. So I think it's about offering our community the alternative ability to socialise and to have social functions of our city in between our different people of our city. Like we're so much more diverse than ever before, and we've got a really good opportunity to make things amazing here. And I think that what is the value of play? There's no price on it. It's just the value of your imagination.
Trish.
Rhea's getting into my head. I was thinking, how could we connect with SIT, with make a competition perhaps to do some pieces of art that go around, this. I'm thinking in Christchurch there's this huge elephant beside the piano, and lots of people are drawn into that. Also, we must remember our youth. We've got to think about how they can be part of this. And I look at the Burger King basketball place. People are there all the time, even in school hours when they should be at school. But I think something that actually the family can come in and the kids can wander off, and I know that that's part of it, but we just need to keep that balance.
Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I'm really interested in the project advisory group coming back with the all ages concept, because I think that is vitally important, that we're providing for the young families, kindergarten age right through to teenagers who want their own stuff and don't necessarily want to be with the family at all. So I'm really looking at an all ages encompassing report coming back, because we don't. I think we would miss our opportunity if we concentrate on one age group or even on families, but miss out the teenagers. So I'm looking forward to the further information.
Grant.
Yeah, and on the back of that, also that crossed over with what's the economic value of those different participation groups in this CBD, if that makes sense. So, because we've got to reinforce the fact that there's economic value in attracting those people in. So I'll be really keen to see some information around, you know, family and CBD is X amount of value to retailers versus youth versus different pieces, if we can get data like that, because it reinforces, you know, back to that principle about this has got to have economic benefit to the city as well as all the other pieces as well.
Thanks. I will forever remember as a parent, whenever we would want to come to town with two toddlers, that there were two places that they wanted to go when we found out that we were leaving the house. One was a boiga joint, and the other was essentially a commercial playground. And I tried to think about why do they always want to go there? Actually, it was for play. It was for activity, and all we needed to do was to give them half an hour of activity and our time, which bought us an hour and a half to go and do what we needed to do. So there were benefits to us as a family and benefits to the businesses from us being in that space. But I'm also acutely aware of the difference between toddlers and teenagers, which is massive and frightening in both ends of the scale, to be fair. And you know, we had in the last council a presentation to us by some young people who talked about the sorts of things that they wanted to see, and essentially it's being able to access stuff that is commercial activity for free, which isn't necessarily our bag, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing that's going to excite them. And as we know, we've got that engagement going on with youth. We've asked them what vibrancy is, and there's a public workshop being facilitated by Coin South tomorrow night that's going to explore that further, and I'm guessing, Steve, some of the findings from that will come into effect with what it is that you're looking for with urban play.
Yeah.
Tania.
You just reminded me with my two teenage boys, the things that they really enjoyed was the scientific discovery type stuff, things that they actually had used their head.
Ria?
Can I just add, I don't want to forget about our elderly to our city. You know, some of them have quite a lonely existence. So we need to be able to do or have some type of activity that brings them into our city centre. You know, we think music and movements for our little ones, but it's actually just as active for our elderly that don't get the chance to come in town, that are really isolated at home. So it's about drawing them back out as well. And it's pretty amazing when you don't know someone, and Southlanders are really good, and you don't know someone, you see someone elderly, you want to help them. But it goes back as well to the elderly that want to say, in my day, you know, so it's trying to make sure that we have that element as well.
Yeah, good point. I mean, because it's still their day.
Yeah,
it is.
They're still here and with us. So you're suggesting a climbing wall?
Well, if we're all Steve Austin, maybe that would work.
Checkers.
Well, I've seen people well above my age who are far more able to scale those things than I am at this point.
Although it does go back to a discussion that I see taking place in the UK at the moment, where it's winter, and the need for warm, safe places for older people. And Mr. isn't here, is he? You know, the foyer of the Civic Theatre, where there is a piano and could be a warm, safe place when it's not otherwise out for rent. But do we open it up, and do we sort of say there's music in the theatre foyer from 10 till 2 on a Thursday or something like that? You know, we've got to think of alternative ways of using the spaces we have and the equipment that we have to actually, and it was that talk about nostalgia that reminded me that one of the things in a number of the places that I see, it's not just that there's a cup of tea there or that it's warm, but it's comfortable and it's welcoming. And every time I go into that foyer, it's that thickness of the carpet and it's the colours and all that sort of thing that make you feel warm and welcome. How do we utilise places like that? Not necessarily that place, but places like that. The other thing that came up yesterday when I was at something else was about safe non-alcohol selling places in the middle of the city for the sort of the the loose ends, shall we say, the people that they're not perhaps old enough, or they're not inclined to go to alcohol selling places. A place to sit and meet somebody that is not necessarily so bustly, because some of the places we're talking about, like retail spaces, can be quite overwhelming for people who are neurodiverse or perhaps struggling with their personal wellness. Do we offer places like that, and is that something that would add value to our inner city? But Wachner.
Thanks. Good point. It's interesting. I think the portion of the Civic Theatre that you were talking about is now known as the Piano Lounge, and is hosting a performance of the Nico Harp Trio this weekend. But much as people have talked about, an old stand-up rinky-dink piano in a public space that you could go and play, imagine being able to pop in there and have a tickle on a Steinway. Wouldn't be a bad opportunity. And there are so many skilled players out there who might welcome that. It's really interesting idea for activation.
Utilising the relationship with the place next door where there's, performance and very good.
Thank you, Steve.
So look, I might summarise what I've heard, and it's been really great feedback, and that's going to help our team pull something valuable back together for you. 3 real key strong themes have come out of this conversation. Is you want to understand clearly the value of a centralised versus a dispersed play offering, both from a social and an economic sense. You want to understand, and you want to really see that we're very clear around the demographic targets and how we are flexible in the use and how we attract different parts of our community at different parts of the day, and also then relate that back both to the social and the economic value of that engagement. And probably the other key one is you're really looking for some degree of flexibility and multi-use approach, that it can't just be one thing and one thing only to one group of people. It's got to be a little bit of everything. So that, if they're the 3 key themes, and I think there's a number of points that you've raised that fall under those, if they're the 3 key themes, I can then take that back to the group and we'll get on the way with that work. But if I've missed anything or you disagree, probably now's the time to tell me.
It's not a forever hold your peace, because obviously this forms it starts to inform a document that comes back that goes out for consultation. So there is a chance to cogitate. But well summarised. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Right, we are skipping over the City Walkway Sculpture Garden section, which brings us to beautification. And Shannon, welcome along.
Kia koutou. We're going to go through 3 main things. So we thought it would be helpful to start with asking you guys what you think beautification means. Secondly, we'll break down some of the things, a lot of the things that council is already doing in terms of beautification of the city. And then lastly, we'll discuss other areas that you guys think that council could perhaps raise a standard or come to the table with something new. So when you guys hear the word beautification, somebody brave enough to talk first, what comes to mind?
Go, Rhea.
Aesthetic.
What do you mean by that?
So it's how the outside looks. It's maintenance, structure, colour.
Trish?
Something that makes me stop and look.
Green space, artwork.
2 different things or together?
Combinational.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite to Trish. I don't think of things that make me stop and really take notice. It goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. Things that make me feel comfortable and welcome.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, could be things that are unfamiliar to me that I might want to examine, but it's that embracing sort of feeling I feel about beautification.
I'm a great fan of public art in spaces, but also that the areas are kept tidy, which falls back to us mostly, but there can also be challenges sometimes around private spaces where there are recessed areas onto private building owners' land that when the rubbish starts to form there, we don't necessarily, that's not our area, but I don't think we should ignore it either.
That's a good point.
Anybody else?
Just making it
Grant?
look better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's be honest, beautification is a lot about the physical appearances. And when you look up the definition, it's a marriage of what Ria and Evelyn said, that it's about improving the physical appearance or the visuals of an area to make it more of an attractive place to live, to work, to hang out. So it's all of those things. Rhiannon, sorry, could you go to the next slide? So let's talk about what council's already doing. So as Darren alluded to, maintenance. So rubbish recycling and street cleaning happens 6 days a week. That's already ongoing. You've just heard and you see every day the redesign of Esk and Dawn Street. So considerable investment has gone into making that a more pedestrian friendly, beautiful space that activities can happen in. Part of that design involved having flexible spaces so that you could have concerts. The seating doubles as stages. You haven't seen it yet, but there's changeable lighting, art pieces going in. There's annual heritage funding available for facades improvements to heritage buildings. A lot of studies have been done that not only does that benefit obviously the asset owner, but that's the streetscapes are about civic pride. You know, that's it's something that we all, you know, have a bit of ownership in, and improving those buildings makes a huge difference, as we know, to how we interpret our community. Parks and recreation, as well as roading and planning, have been working on a draft strategy for road network beautification. So that'll have to do with things like the center plots on D and Tay, other green spaces that have to do with roadways. They want to be clear right now that, you know, that will include goals and principles, but there would still have to be next steps of how are you actually putting these actually into place, and I'm sure you guys will see that document soon. Roading has released the footpath management policy and guidelines, which really, they're just trying to enable outdoor dining. You're a business, you're a coffee shop, you're just not quite sure. Can you have sandwich boards? Can you have seating? Great. We're starting to outline that and hoping to work with people to try to figure out what works best for their business, because everybody wants to go to a street where people are sitting outside and you hear people mingling, and that's a big part of city life. Public art, as Darren says. So we do have several pieces of public art. There's going to be some that are returned to the streetscape that were taken out during construction, but also council took part in some innovative streets programs where some smaller murals went up because of that. More recently, council helped support through the Community Wellbeing Fund, as well as waiving the resource consent fees for South Sea Spray, which I think we can all agree was a pretty huge success. And there are different public art things going through downtown. Seasonal lighting, so right now it's mostly twice a year at Christmas and Matariki, but the seasonal lighting goes up. And then as well as council several years ago established that city center coordinator role. So that's our general quick list of the things that council's already doing now and how we're involved in beautification. Next would be your guys' thoughts of perhaps the direction that you might put us towards. What else could we be doing?
Can I just kick off by asking that we look inwardly to what we're doing around rubbish? Because I do see in Esk Street, for example, rubbish and recycling bins, which is great at either end, but I've looked around, I've struggled to try and find one part way down. And if we're going to be encouraging more people to be activated in that area, rather than giving them the excuse to just drop something because they've got to walk more than 50 feet to a rubbish bin, that we look at those opportunities to see if they can drop off their rubbish in recycling.
Yeah.
I'm happy to make a comment on that one.
Thanks.
Which was, we had this debate when we were doing the city centre master plan and the design work around how much we needed in terms of rubbish bins. I was possibly pushing for a few more, but we also didn't want to wind up with rubbish bin city in the middle of the street either. So we sort of came to a compromise where we would go with a little bit less is more approach initially, and then we'd monitor it to see if we'd gotten it right. The initial feedback is we probably haven't gotten it right in some places. We are having some bins overflowing at certain times of day. So we're just keeping a close eye on that as around whether we need to increase our collections or whether or not we need to have more bins in that space, but definitely something we're aware of.
Cool, that's great. Thanks. I mean, we're keeping an open mind and we're gathering information, so that's really cool.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, thank you. I'm pleased that it's been brought up because I was going to bring it up earlier. But people are actually stuffing rubbish in the seating area if they're having their lunch there, the food packaging and that. So it's obviously not enough, or they're too far apart. I'm just not sure. I'm very pleased that that has been mentioned.
Ringy?
Just apologies for lateness, Chair.
Noted, thanks. Grant?
The beautification program, in particular in relation to the roading network, that's a whole city thing, right?
Yes, yeah, that's a citywide program.
So
Sorry, I should have. Yeah.
As well as the
Rhea?
So I when I do have the opportunity to walk around the city, and it is via our heritage buildings, there are some, and I'm pleased to say the area there that there's improvements for the facades. Facades. I never know how to say that word, because some of them are quite concerning.
Yeah.
And you know, they have got better, but they're not good enough.
Yeah.
They're not. They look like they are unsafe and could fall down. And there's even some other buildings along other areas that, you know, you are mindful after such natural disasters that there are some structural concerns of their reach out past the footpath as well. But I'm pleased to say that that will be improved. That City Heritage funding for
So there are two roles that we have as the council. One is as a regulator, and when there are issues that are genuinely of public safety and there are standards set for that, then we're able to act. For other stuff which is subjective about how tidy things look or don't look, that's what we try to encourage, and the heritage funding is one of those options. So if people are tidying up their building, then it's a chance for them to get subsidised paint to make that easier. Grant?
Yeah, just the other point around how does Bluff fit into this?
Into the city centre beautification?
Well, particularly around the network and roading thing, that would be part of the wider city thing.
Yeah, I would have to defer to Parks for that question of how Bluff fits into the road network beautification strategy.
Great question, Councillor. Look, it will be factored in. Essentially, what we're looking at is where do we maintain green space in a grey space, and to what standard, and why are we doing it? And so the team are looking at all of these areas at the moment, and so I'm expecting that will come back with a view of the entire area, including Bluff.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Trish?
Also some sort of crazy stuff, like, you know, just with paint, you know, just on concrete. It doesn't have to be expensive, but, you know, it could be something like Phlox is put up, and but it doesn't have to be like that. But it could be just something where kids connect with, you know, cartoon. Oh, I don't know, cartoon. You know, something.
Yeah.
Just sort of a bit mad. That doesn't have to be there forever.
Yeah.
Some intrigue and whimsy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Wellington in Cuba Street has the buckets.
Wasn't it?
Yes.
When people don't pinch them.
Yes, it does. Erin?
Thank you. Sorry, Shannon, just as part of beautification, I just wanted to possibly draw out a little bit more the comment that Councillor Kett made around rubbish in the CBD, particularly in the newly developed areas of Eskindon. I guess traditionally we haven't had, I guess, a level of service whereby we would see somebody go through the CBD at 6 a.m. in the morning and make sure any of the rubbish from the night before had been potentially plucked out of the gardens, potentially on a Monday morning, that, you know, the street had been cleaned of anything that had perhaps spilt there the night before. It is something that some other CBDs have, that regular role of people who go through and look after that city heart, I guess, first thing in the morning. Now, it's obviously something that comes with a cost, but given that the investment that we've made in the CBD, I guess I was interested in getting some feedback from elected members as to whether or not that's something we felt we should be investing in.
I think
Trish.
I think it's important that we keep it nice, you know, to keep it smart and attractive and stuff. So even if it was just initially to see how it worked, I think it would definitely be a benefit.
Ria?
I think so. I'm having attended a conference around the country. One of the worst things as a visitor to areas is the rubbish, and it's quite off-putting and doesn't really give you a good lasting memory. So I think it's quite important to keep it clean.
Yeah, and it's often self-fulfilling, isn't it? If people see rubbish around, they leave rubbish around.
Yeah.
So if we keep it clean, you know, it probably encourages people to take care and facilitate that with.
I've already sort of noticed it myself wandering around that, you know, some mornings there's Chinese containers in the gardens and things like that, which is not really something that we want in our newly invested in CBD.
Did you pick them up?
I did, actually.
In the old days, you get whacked behind the ears for doing that. For putting
What,
rubbish
picking
on
it
the
up?
Or leaving it.
Evelyn?
Yes, just the thing about the seasonal lighting. It came up briefly earlier this year about perhaps putting what we call the Christmas lights up for Matariki. Please don't. If you want to put lights up for Matariki, they should be not Christmas, because that's not what Matariki is about. It's not Christmas in winter. I appreciate the ambition to get more value out of the investment in the lights, but if you think that using lights to commemorate Matariki is a good idea, then might I suggest that you look at how we can acquire appropriate lights for that. But again, I refer to a comment that the chair made earlier about using digital display, because I think that offers much more flexibility.
I think, sorry, we do have an item, don't we, Rhiannon, a little bit further on to discuss Matariki? Is that right?
Discussing activation in general, yeah, but anything related to the physical infrastructure is definitely relevant for discussion now.
Okay. So then it's worthwhile. I absolutely agree with you, Evelyn. If we want to do something Matariki, then we need to frankly understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. I have it on my radar. Councillor Pontage has given me a very clear steer that we need to be thinking about Matariki. What I'm conscious of is that we already have a very successful event that runs in Queen's Park, and we need to think about how we complement that rather than trying to compete with it. But I definitely think it's worthwhile doing. I was looking at some stuff that Auckland did with different colours of display and how that represented the various different elements of Matariki. Actually researching that, I learnt quite a bit. So I guess what I'm again looking for is some feedback from council of, is that something that we would like to invest in? Obviously Matariki's not far away. We'd need to get on very quickly to getting some lights specific to the purpose and getting some research around what we can do in that space. But it's, you know, to Evelyn's point, we can potentially do things that are quite effective without a lot of cost, but it will be with some cost.
Ring.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I guess my desire for lighting is greater. Matariki was one example, but if you look at our hours of daylight, we have extremely light summers, but we have equally we have extremely dark winters. So we've got the ability to have some subtle white lighting. Colours, very difficult to use colours because it's so easily to get them wrong. Please, now Queen's Park Band Rotunda has gone back to white because it used to look like disco duck. there for a while, and it wasn't cool. So I think the investment for that period of time, because people are going to be using these new city streets for walking between the new various entertainment places. So it's just it's a very economic way to give it some buzz. Matariki's a separate thing completely, but we need to just simple white LED lighting done tastefully.
Grant.
Yeah, just two things. One, I've had a bit of feedback around the Christmas lights up in the winter time, so maybe that's a July thing, not a June thing. But I think that would be a good thing for us to do, and I think kids would love that, and they get to see them because a lot of kids are well and truly in bed by the time the lights are functional in the summertime. Second thing around the Matariki is that an opportunity for partnership. If either we provide the lights, we'll put them up.
Rhea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking about the impact of the, it's not a negative either, a positive impact on when I'm driving up to South City and I see the lights up there, and it's really welcoming. And I kind of think to myself, there are areas that we could, as you say, low cost, but we have to invest in something. I think that would be beneficial for us. In terms of Matariki, our community votes with their feet when they go there, and there are certainly a lot of people that do go there. And it is an amazing event. I just want to see it getting better and better.
Quite right, with South City and the colours of the aurora that are reflected off the street lights. You should go for a cruise down Tay Street and see what's happening outside the ICL car park at the moment. It's quite spectacular. Trish?
It's beautiful. What I was going to say, we were there in the weekend, and there were a number of cars doing a lap, looking at them, and then sitting.
No, not in Invercargill.
Yes, it still happens.
Sitting and re-looking at it.
Doing a Mainer.
I did do a lap. I didn't have the right car, but I do really would love to see something for Matariki, Erin, something that was tasteful, that fitted. It didn't have to be a big, well, I suppose there is some cost, but certainly it is at our heart of our community.
Peter?
Yeah, I like to think we could think outside the square and have something with a bit of movement in it, not necessarily flags, but something like that. I don't say we should copy Wellington with their water feature and that, but just something different. I wouldn't suggest the wind one like they've got in New Plymouth, but
Or the lightning conductor.
maybe not.
I think there was a presentation to council a couple of years ago about potential wind sculptures that came from a group. They're a thing that's worth considering at some point, I guess, but you've got to weigh up the costs versus how much space they require versus how much maintenance they're going to need. But they certainly become a great talking point if they're relevant, and that comes back to the discussion around Matariki. And Evelyn, thanks for raising the point of making sure that if there is something done, that it is relevant.
Well, I was going to actually say, because the suggestion was about relationship with iwi, and the thing about it is, whilst we acknowledge it as a national holiday called Matariki, we don't celebrate Matariki here because you can't see Matariki at that time of the year. We celebrate Poaka. So we're not going to do things in conflict with what goes on in Queen's Park. Iwi, as you know, have done things like the Matariki breakfast, Poaka breakfast, where we talk about the astronomy and have breakfast for people. Te Aroha did a different kind of thing last year. We're doing our own thing, which is different, but I think my point was more about, if you're going to use lighting, make it appropriate lighting, not lighting that is about a Christian festival that is held in winter time in the Northern Hemisphere. And I think we need to be really clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and if we're investing money. But for me, I really took on board what the chair had referred to earlier about the possibility of other ways, and I was reflecting what you said about the lights that were reflected on buildings during the markets 2-3 years ago. It's a relatively easy way of doing things, and for Grant and those who said about the eating spaces in the inner city, you know, the south side of S Street could reflect onto the north side of S Street, or the north side of D Street, Don Street could reflect on the vice versa, you know. And provide a different perspective, because of those facades change even how the images look, because I noticed that they look different depending on which building was reflecting it back. It's not permanent infrastructure, which is the issue with the Christmas lights, because they get really battered during the heavy weather events. I think that was one of the comments about they get affected by their winter weather much more so than they do about being up in summer. Maybe the modern ones don't as much, but it was a comment some years ago when they did go up in winter that they got a bit of a beating. So we need to think about those things before we make those decisions.
Ringy.
Right, I see a couple of options here. Is that, Erin, have we engaged with a professional lighting consultant yet, just to touch on ideas and simple quick fixes to more serious stuff? Yeah.
So that would be the next step after getting some direction today out of the workshop, that's something that council wanted to pursue. Essentially, if I came back and said, you know, we're going to need a couple of $100,000 to make this happen, I wanted to see whether there was some interest in it first, frankly, because as much as we talk about doing it cheap, once you have the equipment, you can obviously roll it out year on year fairly cheaply. Okay. But given we haven't made that initial investment, we'll have to have a look at what that cost would be.
No, cool, because the other option is a return trip to China. I don't think.
I don't think so. That's not happening.
We've got some new councillors, though.
That's not happening.
There's a reason I've waited till I really had to take this one on, councillor.
I guess, you know, like sorry, Mr. Chair. Sorry. I guess, you know, it is that time when we put together all that we wish for, and all that we want in terms of having community happily involved and things looking pretty and beautiful and things like that. And I guess it comes back to the expenditure of that wish list. Yeah. So from my perspective, and I'm open-minded at all times, that I'd want it to be responsible spending for something that would be quite valuable to our community and not a cent over.
So, you know, it's interesting because I think everybody's enthusiastic about lighting, but it's a really good grounding moment when you say that we are trying to, you know, maintain a cap on potential rates rises and go, well, this is the process. We go out, we say, well, we feel this way. How do you feel? And it might come at a cost. Is that something that as a city, as ratepayers, you're prepared to invest in? Possibly a better sourcing process that may have been used previously. I'll step aside from that. But that's essentially what one of the things that today is about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Beautification is important because it fosters pride in our built environment, and there's really been a push in the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years to really move that way. When we did the master planning consultations, we just heard the word pride over and over and over again. So I'm going to go through what I think I heard as your guys' main points, just so that we know moving forward what we can take back to the group. So the first thing that came up was the maintenance of council assets. So we heard about rubbish. Something that we didn't touch on was graffiti. Since 2020, there's been quite a marked increase in graffiti. I know that within the heritage portfolio, I have a lot of calls from my heritage building owners. Our understanding is there used to be some budget to work on that, and there is that no longer. So that would be something I would put to you guys to consider moving forward as to graffiti removal. The second would be improving neglected buildings. As you said, you know, you look at them, are they safe? They are improving, as Grant said. There are a lot working towards a better appearance. Something that didn't come out of that conversation, but that maybe you had meant, did you also include the untenanted spaces? Like those first stories, do you feel that they affect
people
how you
don't-
see a building?
Yes, so I look at a building in its wholeness,
Yeah.
the size, not just what's on the footpath and my height. So
Verandas make it hard.
yes, well, not for me, but maybe for someone else. But
Stitch.
but it is that it is.
Hi ho.
Oh, so you try and be serious, and these guys don't do that. But anyway, so yes, I think it's important that we do have unintended spaces also maintained, and it comes up a lot of times in discussion. I don't know how we as a council can put the onus on a non.
It's
landlord.
it's what I touched on before, Council.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
stuff that
Yeah.
visually annoys the living daylights out of us,
same
but
here.
we can't actually do anything
That's
about. I mean,
correct.
I saw a reasonable degree of lawn growing out of the
Yes, I know what
veranda above Cotton On this
Yes.
morning, the old Cotton On space.
Mm.
But that's we can't go around and touch private property, but we
Correct.
can contact the building owners and
Yes.
ask them to. But if they
Yes,
don't,
and we do.
Yes.
and until it's a health hazard, there's nothing we can do. Barry.
Yeah, it's always concerned me, and Rangi will probably be able to help me out with this. The CCTV thing, we can do it all we want in this city. If we haven't got any security and people don't feel safe in going into areas, we need to do.
So that's a work in progress, and it's coming back
Yeah.
to council next month.
Thursday.
Thanks.
Thursday.
Ringy?
Look, just touching on it's a form of graffiti. It's the black tire marks that create these bloody mosaics and stuff in the road. You know, from burnouts.
Trish.
Oh, you've already touched on
She
that.
did it. No, she did it the other night.
Oh,
looking
she
at
did it the other
lights.
night.
Yeah, with the
Is
dishwasher.
that in a mobile scooter?
Sleep with your eyes open.
Sorry, but I just you look at it, and I don't know whether it upsets other people, but to me, it's.
It's
It
tough
looks-
if it's a state highway.
I'm talking just roads all around town.
Roads in general.
But also not easy to.
No, but obviously with the CCTV number plate recognition and stuff, I think
If we get that far, yeah.
yeah, we'll get there.
So I'll come back to Shannon's summary. Anything else that?
And the third and final thing that I think I heard was we're looking for some intrigue, whimsy, and color. Something that catches your eye, but is also welcoming. Those things can coexist the same. So maintenance, look at our condition of our buildings, and then bringing some color and intrigue into downtown.
Can we just emphasise the digital aspect of that?
I've got it noted down.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. So, councillors, that covers off a lot of the things that we're looking at around place, and now we move Rhiannon on to people.
So yeah, just as you start a discussion around what do you want in terms of activating and creating an active space for people that's moving beyond the topics we've already discussed on infrastructure, just a reminder on the strategic priorities and community outcomes that are really relevant to this area that you've confirmed for this LTP. So you talked about meeting the changing needs of our rangatahi as part of the wider population, which is growing older and more diverse, and delivering city centre renewal, and a community outcome for a vibrant, safe city centre that meets our people's diverse cultural needs. So we're going to kick off with a discussion on vibrancy and what you as councillors see and mean by that.
Welcome, Richard.
Kia ora. Am I doing this? Oh, there we go.
Tag, you're it.
And you've seen this slide before, but I'll just repeat it because I really do like this definition. Vibrancy, simply put, to be vibrant is to be full of energy, enthusiasm, activity, and life. In other words, healthy and alive. The presence and the amount of vibrancy is a reasonable proxy for a city's general health and well-being. Now as ever, understanding what makes vibrant places where we can come together is essential for the future of our cities. That's definition by the American Planning Association, but I do like it because it kind of sums up what we're trying to achieve. Again, you've seen this one before. the key elements of a vibrant city: flow, that's about how we move around the city to get to where we want to go to, but also in a way that's minimal fuss. We want well-loved places that people are drawn to, but also that they come back to again and again. Cultural amenities that are inclusive, where people go for cultural exchange to learn about each other, which is about creating a healthy and vibrant society, but also growing community connections. So it's not just putting on an event or a celebration for a particular part of the community that only that community sees. It's about welcoming the other aspects of community to gain cultural understanding. Places and events, a high density of unique businesses and events that are in that place that change, renew and excite. So it's not just the same old thing every year. And the last one is vibe, the unique character or spirit of the place. And that's important to be ours and not other people. There's lots of fantastic examples that we see around the country and around the world, and I've heard some of them just today as I came in. But that doesn't mean that a carbon copy of other people's ideas will work here. So we've got to make sure that we take the best of those things, but also put our own flavour, our own authenticity to it. Next slide.
Actually, just while you're on that, Richard, you missed a discussion earlier on when we were talking about the piano lounge at the Civic and how in quite often public spaces there'll be a stand-up public piano. What is the chance of looking at the opportunity of having people coming in to play on the
We've been doing that for about 12 months now.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
So probably 4 or 5 times a week there'll be someone in there playing. We've got a concert pianist who's ex-Korean concert pianist who comes in that stuns everyone. We sometimes have to close the door because she's quite loud. She's quite powerful. Beautiful. We have a couple that come in and play to each other, which is a beautiful sight. A third age couple. And we've also, it's really heartwarming. But I can tell from my desk who's playing and whether it's the concert grand sort of thing or whether it's the those old songs that you've heard your grandmother sing. We also have a number of staff that come over in their lunchtime and play. So there's quite often activity there. We've been challenged by being able to communicate that to the public and about some of the things that happen. So that's been because of the COVID clinic but we will open that up and start to talk about this being the living room, a democratic space available to everyone and the sort of the social heart, if you like.
Splendid. Thank you, Richard.
Bless you, Mr. McWade. You are not going to growl at me then because of what I said earlier. Because I
missed it, so I'll say
thing.
Okay, so that's all well and good what we've talked about vibrancy, but how do we actually measure vibrancy? So at the moment, as part of the Beyond 2025 work, there's some surveys going on and some research. So I've been researching tabletop, desktop surveys of the policies that we have and the actions that we're doing, and it's looking pretty good. But here's how I'm measuring it. Through attraction, experience, place and performance. Now these are all lifted directly out of the retail strategy and I think they're really good. So I've applied them to everything. The first one there is attraction. That's a pull factor. It's why people come into the city, why people use our services. Now on the left-hand side, it's a continuum. Do they come in by necessity? I just need a pair of socks. So that's why I'm coming into town. The other extreme is by desire. I'm coming into town, yes, to get my socks, but I just like being in town for some reason and wandering. The next one is experience. The experience when they arrive in our city, is it an expected norm? I can, it's got shops, it's got a few cafes and stuff, or is it engaging and delight? Have I discovered new things when I'm in? Is there a new little laneway that I haven't seen before? Is there a busker that just makes me smile on my journey? Place, does it function? So at the bare minimum, a place does what it says on the box. A car park's a car park. Place to buy a can of Coke is a place to buy a can of Coke. Does it function, or does it provide discovery, surprise and wow? Are there pieces of art? Are there pieces of play equipment that make you think, wow, I understand what some traditional Māori games were about. I understand about balance and how you trained for taiaha by jumping from stump to stump. All of those sorts of stories that enriches you and think, wow, I didn't know that about where I lived. So that's the great end of the place. And the last one is performance. It functions. It just does what it needs to do. As opposed to the other end, it exceeds the new user needs. You go, wow, next time if I'm sitting out in Gore and I'm thinking, do I need to go to Dunedin or do I need to go to Invercargill? You go, actually, they've both got an XYZ of farmers that I'm going to. but man, I want to go to Invercargill because every time it's a fantastic experience. And that's about, you've heard pride today, that's about building pride. It's also about building livability, attractiveness for not only using the city centre, but as a place to live, as a place to invest, as a place to do business and have confidence that this is a place where I'm prepared to have my head office or my showcase store, etc. So that is the 4 factors that we're going to be looking at through the surveys. Now, the surveys that are going out cover a whole lot of things: how far people have travelled, why they're coming into town, what their view is of the town now post a bit of development work. Do they feel safe? What time of the day are they coming? All of these things will provide us business intel, and we're doing it in conjunction with retailers, in conjunction with the businesses in town. So as we've got a data set that we can actually delve into for a whole lot of different reasons. We're also collecting FPOS data. So that's a way of looking at the sales of the city in terms of that block by block, what's happening, what's been purchased, and what those trends have been over the last 3 or 4 years. And that gives us a bit of a metric to put some science to some of the things that we think are true and happening at the moment. So that's our approach. 4 factors, but 4 discussion points that are really interesting to take some ideas to and just say, well, are we doing something that, if you talk about Matariki, putting up lights, is it just going to do the necessity, or is it going to be so desirable people will seek it out and come and travel for it? All of these factors can be applied to any of our decision makings around beautification or urban development.
Mr. Chairman, all I can say is, wow, just a breath of fresh air. Where did you get this man from?
Wellington. Pretty good snatch, to be fair.
Auckland, thank you. And also, Matariki was my festival in Auckland. I led the Matariki Festival. So,
Did you go to the one in Bluff?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Right, you better fix that.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide.
Sorry.
It's just a question regarding, I'm going to leap straight into a question that I get asked at least twice a day by people, is about low, obviously S Street and a redevelopment there. A lot of people actually think it's going to be no traffic. They don't realise it's going to be slow one way. But obviously you'll be, the ability to, with the consent of the retailers, to block off S Street to pedestrian only for certain periods.
So we had covered this off earlier.
Oh, you did? Yeah, you did. So that's great. So that's an ace in the hole for us. We never had it before. So you've covered that. Did you come to what sort of conclusion?
There's no conclusions. It's a workshop.
No.
However, there was the gist of what you're talking about was certainly being supported. That that people like the fact that is potentially a
because it feeds
space.
It feeds so much into what Richard's talking about here.
Grant?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic framework to sort of give us a great insight into where we're at. So well done, that's awesome.
Just some survey sitting on my desktop at the moment. So.
Just with the measurement, I know having 3 teenage daughters, often they'll come into the city in a retail experience, but not necessarily purchase and then go online. So it'd be good to capture that because it's still economic activity. It's just not in the traditional manner. So I think it's important that any data reflects that as well, just so that we get a full lens of that economic activity that's driven out of the CBD, not necessarily directly linked to it.
And I think that what you're hitting on there is a trend worldwide.
Yeah, it is.
There are more and more places that I suspect, in the retail world are going to become showrooms.
That's right.
In the same way that the Apple stores have done for a number of years. And it's still an experiential thing. I still want to touch and look and think, is medium really medium, or am I giant every time I order off Wish, So you still want to be able to see and touch a product, but you might want to go home and think about it and then try and search for that product.
But it links back to that investment decision that some businesses might make, because they're factoring that into their business models.
Absolutely.
So we'll still get businesses investing, albeit they might shape their retail experience differently.
But it's also an investment that retailers need to make in their staff to make sure that they're giving their customers the client experience that makes them want to come and have a 3D organic interface rather than an online purchase.
We also know that COVID, one of the positive things out of COVID was that our transition to a digital world, to an online world, has ramped up. So we are buying more offline than we than what was expected to do. And we've got a bit of a catch up and to just sort of reevaluate what retail means and what city centres mean. And the experience aspect is fundamental. I know with the Civic over there, we've been doing a lot of work on prettying it up, and you might think, well, that's just trite and unnecessary, but the reason to get someone off the couch in a demand culture nowadays, electronic with Netflix and all that, it's got to be the experience, it's got to be the service they receive and the visuals and the whole wrap around. It's not just about that product, that show or that retail purchase. It's everything from the time they get out of from the time they find a car park to they get into that retail store. What was their experience? What sort of surprise, delight, and what messages did we give them? All confidence and pride in the city. Right. I think Rhiannon, do you want to take this one?
So one of the specific questions that we just wanted to see what you as councillors were thinking about in terms of the city centre relates to food trucks. It's quite a specific item, but prior to COVID, prior to all the work commencing, there was some food truck presence within the city centre. There are some limitations on food truck activity within the environmental health bylaw. So just really be interesting to see what you think about your vision for the city centre going forward and vibrancy, and what, if any, role you see food trucks playing in the future.
Personally, I think that there's an opportunity that exists as a semi-permanent one, rather that they are there for events to add to, but they're not rate-paying businesses who should actually be our priority. You know, if we've closed off Esk Street to have an event, the ability to bring in those food trucks is fine, provided they've got the appropriate licensing. But whether they were there, unless they had a permanent hawker's license, and I can think of one that's been in 3 locations currently, and it doesn't really compete against anything else that's there. But if you're looking at Esk Street, would you have hawkers there every day when you've got rate-paying businesses on either side? Personally, I'm a little reluctant towards that. But Rangi?
Yeah, same here, Chair. Look, I do everything cautiously with close consultation with the existing retailers who can provide takeaway food for people to walk out of the mall and sit in East Street. I mean, it's the same thing, you know, buying it from a truck or. And you did right, they're rate paying, and they're paying extremely high square metre rates inside there. So I'm very cautious, but if it all depends on what these retailers feel. As long as the consultation's right, I mean, there is a place for them, but it just needs to be handled extremely carefully,
Thanks, Rangi. We'll be going Rhea, Barry, Trish, then Evelyn. Rhea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in the mind of where you're coming from, actually, is we need to make sure that we don't do a disservice to our ratepayers that are offering food services. However, in the same sense, I've also found myself walking down to Gala Street and enjoying Uncle's Kai and others as well. I think there is a place for our food trucks. It just is where they're situated. That is a key element to getting this correct. We know that we've got alternative services to get food to our homes and what have you, and that is, and it was an emerging trend, now it's a must. So yes, I do support having food trucks, but in a specific area outside of the city centre.
Barry?
Yeah, I think the place for food trucks is reserves in like Kiratonga and places like that, but certainly not in the middle of the city centre, which we're trying to make really nice. I don't think their place would be anywhere in that area, because we're going to take the revenue from businesses that are actually trying to get ahead.
Trish?
It's a balance, really. I think I'm with Rhea in lots of ways. I think we definitely want to have food trucks because the kids love them, and that brings the kids in. We don't necessarily want them in the city central, though. I think they need to be accessible in walking distance if that's what they want, but not at the expense of the people who are in the city centre.
Evelyn?
It's really interesting because there's a couple of those food trucks that are still operating that absolutely sustained people during the works and streetscapes, and when we talk about rate-paying businesses, those people in their own right are ratepayers. They're citizens of the city. We need to look at all the citizens of the city equally, not just the ones that occupy prime retail sites, because some of those aren't citizens of the city. Leaving that aside, food trucks provide variety and they provide flexibility. I think that we had them before streetscapes because there was always a couple of them of recent years, the last 8 or 9 years, certainly, that at least a couple of days a week operated out of Wachner Place. So they obviously served a need that existed prior to the redevelopment of the inner city. I'm uncomfortable with us saying to them, oh, well, we've done all this work, now you can go. You were necessary, but now we don't want you. Can we look at how we can more flexibly look at this and say to them, where do you see the opportunities? Because it's not just us. I don't know how many people use the ones that are currently now on lower part of Tay Street. Is that their third location in the redevelopment? I don't think it's just workers. And so there are places in this, even in the inner city, that don't have as many eat places as we think they do. Perhaps these food trucks actually provide a service and we should think about that. Yeah,
it is a balancing act. Council did, through a previous coordinator, organise Food Truck Fridays in Wachner Place, which was fine. You know, it was a once a week for 2.5 hours thing. But it was also immediately outside 3 food retailers. They didn't object because it was an everyday thing and actually it attracted people to the area as well. So, you know, the swings and roundabouts. Richard.
Just if I could offer a commercial lens to this, we've been doing a bit of research. We've got the Highlanders coming up for Rugby Park in March. And we just want to tidy up our food trucks that we have there. So we've done a bit of research about what different people are doing around the country in terms of how they're charging for food trucks. Generally, if it's a site, they're paying a fee, almost like an event fee or a permit fee. If it's a closed gated thing like we will have at Rugby Park or a food and wine festival, it's a fee and then a percentage of take. Now that's difficult to maintain and a whole lot of issues. But the point is they've tried to balance that cost between those paying rent and those in a food truck. There could be a way where, but in contrast to that, if I wanted something in the Civic for a weekend event, I would be begging them to come along and not expecting them to pay. But maybe there is a way in which that if they're downtown, if they're in Esk Street downtown, that they do pay a fee, and the fee is commensurate with the opportunity, and potentially that fee could go back into a vibrancy program and an activation program, ring-fenced, therefore providing benefit for the permanent retailers and the activation of their space out front. Again, it needs to be carefully managed, you know, with times and so that it's not anti-competitive, but I think there is something that could be explored there and has worked elsewhere.
Just recognising that the footpath policy is up there as well, but I'll just remind councillors that we do have something out for consultation at the moment. So. Any other points anybody wish to make at this point? No? Rihanna?
So you've received the summary of what the young people told council in November at Black Friday, but this is just a wee reminder of the things that were really important to them. And as Darren, as you've mentioned earlier, we're holding an event in partnership with Coin over at SOT tomorrow night. Think Outside the Pizza Box, which will look at the 4 biggest themes that young people raised, and they'll get to go through a design thinking process. And those ideas, some of them might be relevant for council to consider, many will be relevant for private entrepreneurs to look at, and we're really grateful to all of the stakeholders that are sending experts along to help the young people in that process tomorrow night. So the things that they said that were the most important to them were youth activities and meeting spaces, and as part of that, events were really popular, and some of you have raised those kind of pop-up events that were mentioned as well. Nightlife was raised by a lot of people wanting more variety of experiences, and as part of that, some more food options as well. Then the third area that was discussed was the city environment itself. Now, lots of investment has got in, both from council directly, but also through the amazing murals that have come through recently and created lots of energy and excitement in the city. So some of the things raised were actually things that have been addressed, which is good. And then the last one that came out through a lot of people was transport. So just given the focus for what's needed by young people, just an opportunity to remind you guys of what they told us. Sorry.
What would? Oh, sorry, Rangi.
Yeah, look, just can someone tell me, young people, what age group are we actually covering here? Because I noticed you talk about bar, drinking. So obviously,
Well, the consultation that we've been doing was with people under the age of 30.
Under 30.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
18 to 30.
Just looking at the nightlife there, it's interesting. You say types of bar. Well, the Trust have opened obviously 360, and probably everyone's been there. Now that is actually an R20 bar. So it's quite interesting. It's a limit to actually not have that particular younger group going there. Is there a consideration that people talk to the Trust about an opposite sort of tact where, sorry, you're over 30, you're not coming in.
Yeah.
You're too old.
It's not uncommon. There are.
I mean, it's worth doing it. I mean, like a fossil like me, you just don't. You don't
Well,
want
that's what the
someone-
museum's about.
You don't want someone
Museum.
who wants Petula Clark played on the CD.
You'd be surprised at the number of young people.
Yeah. But I just like, is that where we're heading? Is that
So that's a commercial thing, really. It's up for the market to decide if you're generating a lot of in-town night activity, and you're targeting, let's say, a young audience with a nightclub, at which point the general manager, the chief executive of the licensing trust said they'll lend any amount of support to somebody who wants to do that, as opposed to a place that was targeting an older demographic. That just creates different variety. So that's, not everybody wants to go to Macca's for a boiga. Some people might like a chicken nugget or what have you. It's about the market offering that variety. Grant, then Rhea.
Yeah, and I think for young people, I don't think it has to be every weekend. It's from time to time. If they've got events to look forward to, like stand-up week concerts and those sorts of things, that's what they see as vibrancy, because they've got busy lives and they're spinning around doing a lot of other things. So, unlike yourself, who's probably a every weekend type of man, I think the kids are sort of more looking for a sort of a from time to time and something to look forward to. So.
Rhea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of engaging with the youth, when we were down at the mall, definitely a lot of the suggestions that have come through are aligning with what council members have said as well over the last 3 or 4 months. On the previous slide, it talked about types of bars. Some of these kids actually talked about milkshake bars, not just alcohol bars. They wanted to have that variety, and we've got Tank, so that's there. But generally, what they wanted to do was they wanted to feel a part of our community and have leadership and trust instilled in them. So I guess it's about making sure that these events that we are planning, whatever it is finally decided on, actually hits that target market of 18 to 30. The mini golf was mentioned quite a bit. That it was a real shame that that we had a limited designed course, and they'd like to see more of that in the ice skating and skating. It's been one of those things that is missed, and people do want to interact there and do those activities.
Again, it becomes a balancing act. We had the temporary
correct.
ice skating rink, which was successful and provided a nice bit of variety, and interestingly was also supported by the Gore ice skating rink. And we would want to be very cautious that we didn't go and establish a facility that replicates what's
so there is
going
that
on.
balance that's also needed in all that wish list too, because that comes with costs as well.
Peter.
Yeah, we mustn't forget the elderly, of course. Could probably turn the clock back, and the old Northern Tavern had the Granny's Bar, and that was very, very popular. see Councillor Pottinger remembers that. But, you know, we must cater for
mean,
all
Alice.
ages. Bring back memories, doesn't it, Raggy?
Oh, God.
But in all seriousness, you know, we must cater for all ages.
Yep. And you know, one of the interesting things, Peter raises a good point. One of the interesting things about making sure that you cater for the elderly, not just in events but in accessibility, is it meets both ends of the spectrum age-wise. So if you're creating accessibility into these public spaces for somebody who might be in a mobility scooter or have some form of disability, or just, you know, be aging and your hips hurt, it's the same for somebody who's pushing a pram.
Yes.
Yes.
And in that young, if we're putting an age bracket on it, you know, I probably see it as 13 to 18 in that youth market, because, you know, we have a lot of young people leave the city to go away to university and that sort of thing. We have a lot to stay as well, but my sense is probably they're better catered for than that 13 to 18 age bracket in terms of some of these activities we're talking about around in our city centre, would be my sense. But I'd be interested in some information.
It'll be interesting to see the information, because they can be challenging to please.
Yes. But it'd be good to see some feedback. Graded. Let's dive into that.
I think our role is to engage with the community and bring that information back. And sometimes we are the wrong people to do the actual activity, but at least we can provide that to our partners. And the other thing to be cautious when we go and talk to community is we often just ask people what they want, and that's not necessarily helpful sometimes, because they will say laser tag, and you go, oh, should we invest in laser tag? Possibly not. But behind that, why did they say laser tag? So doing that analysis about actually they want something to occupy themselves. It might not actually be a bar. It could be, you know, a movie theatre that actually has space to loiter. So we're quite good at creating spaces to avoid loitering, but actually a lot of us just like to hang out. And if you want people to stay in the city, they've got to be comfortable and be able to sit down. And I think there's some great stuff down Esk Street that
It's
bang
the
on
whole
the money
see and
there.
be seen.
Absolutely. So I think
Promenading, I think, is the old term.
Yeah. So as long as we listen to them, but we think what is behind that in terms of that directive, and that's the valuable point.
Yeah.
So that leads on really nicely, as if we planned it, Richard, so thank you, on to this last slide for the discussion slide for this workshop, which is just summarising and talking about the various roles that council plays already in vibrancy, so that we can finish this workshop just covering any last topics that you might want to raise. So for example, in the youth event that we were just talking about, the reason that we've partnered with COIN on that event, who are specialists in helping new businesses start and grow, is that exactly because we recognise that a lot of the work that you as council have invested in is to enable others to activate the city centre, not necessarily to deliver those services itself. So a brief summary of some of the areas where you as a council are supporting activation. Council funds investment in events and activities in the city centre through both our Community Wellbeing Fund and the Creative Communities Fund that we administer. So some high-level analysis just gives you a picture of the number of activities from those funds over the last 2 years that took place in the city centre. We have the city centre coordinator role that's based at Great South and funded by a target rate on city centre property that focuses on activation and connection between businesses and councils. Council owns and operates venues adjacent to the city centre, including the theatre and the Scottish Hall, which we talked about the role of the piano lounge. We fund Great South, which we've asked them over the last few years to have a priority focus on supporting council in the investment that's made in order to activate the city centre. We work with a range of key stakeholders, including through the city centre promotions group, which John Green is plays a leading role in, and we produce strategies in order to make it easier for others to align and activate. Those are always developed through a great deal of consultation and engagement. Richard's talked about the retail strategy, which has been a really important document. The Beyond 2025 work is doing a lot at the moment, looking at that urban rejuvenation space, and we do have the regional events and arts and culture strategy. So there are lots of pieces to this puzzle, And now, as we look at the long-term plan, is there anything really, I guess, handing back to you, Chair, where you feel that in order to support people, there's anything else you want to consider that council could do?
Rangi.
It's not about adding, I don't think it's about adding more, it's about actually quantifying what we're actually doing and seeing the results. So you've said Great South have been doing the city centre thing for 3 years, is that right, Rhiannon? 3 years or so?
About that.
About that, yeah, 3 years. So if we measure that, are we able to measure it? Obviously it's difficult with the rebuild of City Block.
It's a subject that's coming up for discussion later.
Yeah. Right, but obviously, okay, move on from Great South. It's about measuring what we do and not just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
And that's really interesting and tying in with what Richard was talking about in his presentation and trying to gather some of that data to make sure that we are on track or what the gaps are. So I'm really encouraged to see that's going on. Grant?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point you've raised, Rangi, around, we need to take an investment approach to this. We need to not, can we see what we're getting out of it? We need to determine what we want out of it and see the investment we're making and then measure that output. Because, that's the discipline that'll get us the best outcomes or allow us to fail early around, hey, that didn't work, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we realise that early and then direct it to somewhere where we can be more successful. So we've got to take an investment approach as opposed to just a helicopter, drop money and hope everything goes.
That's a really valuable point, Grant. Thanks for raising it. It's just, investments sometimes are about having a go at something. Sometimes they don't come off, but it's as long as you understand why they didn't and learn from it, that's good. Leslie?
I suppose just one thing to add in is consideration about how much we've activated the Scottish Hall and how much we can activate it further. We've talked about the Civic. The Scottish Hall now has the added benefit of being right over the road from the SIT development with a lot more young people and people with artistic flair and so forth right over the road. So is it time to have the conversation about Scottish Theatre and Scottish Hall activation, further activation again?
Rhea?
In support of Leslie, absolutely. As I'm sitting here, it's occurring to me that we don't see a lot of Scottish heritage apart from a well-known one here in our city. We have the Invercargill pipe band, which is famous, yet we don't hear about them until their annual competitions, or if we're lucky enough we can hear them as we're driving down Queen's Drive. It's beautiful, the bagpipes. So it's how can we have our Scottish ancestry more involved in our look and feel and vibrancy to our city as well? Would be really good.
I do remind you of our street name.
Yes, but is that enough? Is that enough? Is that where we stop? I don't want it to.
Well, it's only one of many cultures.
Yeah, very much so. Just sorry, Rhian, on that slide out there, with the, and I realise we're probably going to talk about this later actually. So is our city activator located at Great South?
Yes, has been.
Yes.
Yeah.
All along.
Okay.
Rangi?
Look, Rhea's mentioned something about the Scottish thing, and that is strong in Invercargill. Street names, without a doubt. I mean, you could, Robbie Burns Day, you could do a haggis. A haggis is fantastic, and I mean, the whole city could be eating haggis. It might play a bit of damage on our wastewater system, but I mean, that's something. The whole festival. I mean, we've had the odd haggis ceremony at home, and we couldn't afford the real pipes. We had to put on a cassette, and
oh, how retro!
Yeah, and but it's great, and those embracing those cultures. I think and then you pick another one. You pick maybe an Indian one. You pick another day that's important. I mean, I don't want to be corny, but those. It's quite fun. It's quite fun, and if you want to dress up,
it's a case of measuring out what's going on. So there's the tartan festival that happens.
Put a skirt on
at Easter. So you wouldn't want to clash with that. We have the tremendous celebration at the stadium for Diwali. What are the other opportunities that exist out there that become a chance for us to showcase? And for people who've made the decision to relocate here from whatever part of the world and isolate from their whānau, it's a very empowering thing for us to be able to recognise their culture and diversity and add to ours. Ria, then Trish.
So do we have connections with Red Cross that are placing our that can actually move along, that we can actually be involved in once they're ready, not telling them, but asking about how we can help support them?
Yeah, not
more?
just Red Cross, but I mean in a more multicultural sense as well. Multicultural Southland. Trish, then Barry.
Multicultural use Henson Hall. It's a lot for a lot of their events. But you know, we've got a new community in town, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we're going to have probably 40 families by the end of the year. I mean, it would be an opportunity to help support them, perhaps even get involved. I know when the Colombian community came in, it was only when they got sort of a measure of people in, then they began to form their own groups. But certainly there's a diverse community here.
Barry?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Working Men's Club, and every year we have the Waimatuku band at the Working Men's Club. It's probably one of the biggest events that the Working Men's Club have. They have a haggis and everything, and the place is chocker. Like, you just can't get anyone else in there. So I think that'd be ideal over in the Scottish Hall if we could.
Which is much smaller.
Bring that, yeah. Bring something like that in there.
Peter.
Yeah, thank you. I'll turn the clock way back to the early 1950s when we had all those Dutch people come here. You know, what did happen, some of them brought a barrel organ with them, and that was a major draw card. Absolutely brilliant. It would bring people from miles around. It wasn't Bluff one part of it. Did anyone know it's still housed down there? No? If we could source that would be something special. How many people here have heard music from a Dutch barrel organ?
Is that
Only three of us. That's a big thing.
Oh,
It's huge.
Was the word sheet?
Note it down.
It's that comes back to something that Richard mentioned earlier as well. It is about finding those propositions that are going to get people out of their home. If I go back to the 90s and we looked at live theatre and what it was that saw audiences change. You know, there used to be two plays that Repertory did, and a musical theatre major production and a theatre restaurant that they did. But actually, since then, Sky Television had come along, and a 5 cinema movie complex had come along, and it was. And now we've got streaming services with on demand, and trying to get people out of their home in the first instance is the challenge. But the one thing that streaming can't replace is that human interface. You know, even though retail faces challenges, the one thing that cannot be replaced online is hospitality, and finding those opportunities to create that vibrancy is something that's going to be the challenge that we face in the modern world. So, Richard, did you?
I just want to add to that. We used to talk about multiculturalism a lot, and the trend is going away from multiculturalism and into something called interculturalism. Interculturalism is a central government thing at the moment, realising and recognising that when people come to New Zealand from their culture as refugees or as whatever decision they made, they're coming for a reason that is very important to them, and they're very happy to have escaped whatever. The second generation experience, and these people do experience racism and difficulties and integration. The second generation come along, their children come along, they are really vulnerable because they experience the racism, but they don't have that negative experience that they've escaped from. And they are some of our most vulnerable people. And that's where radicalism happens, terrorist and delinquency, all of those things happen in a second generation thing. With multiculturalism, the approach was always to let's service the Republic of Congo. And to give you an insight, across the road at the Scottish Hall, we host the Multicultural Council, but we also have ethnic days for all sorts of cultures over there. But they're a bit invisible because it's servicing an individual culture, and we're servicing, so it actually stays within that little circle of group. The really powerful thing is interculturalism, where you bring that group together with another group and you expose all of us to it, and we go, wow, that's the same. In the Auckland experience in Matariki, one of the most powerful things was the breaking bread concept, coming together for a feast and sharing your culture. Because Matariki has, for example, a lot of the values that are universal about coming together, recognising passing of people, harvest, all of that sort of stuff. So having different cultures come together is the most powerful thing. So my challenge to you as you go forward is not just think about servicing the individual communities, but showcasing them to the other communities, and strength and solidarity, and weaving those things together. You'll get a much stronger society. Plus also it will look more visually interesting and all of those sorts of stuff.
Evelyn.
As I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking, because of the Dutch club experience, and it's exactly what we talked about. At the time, they wanted a place to congregate together, but when the third generation came along, the need for it was not so strong. A lot of the families felt more connected to the place that they lived, and no longer were hearkening back to the place. If they wanted to experience where their parents or grandparents came from, they went back to Holland. Part of that probably was an economic thing too, that it was more affordable. It was easier to fly home. It was easier to go and visit. But we shouldn't be creating buildings for, or necessarily focusing so much on what we think people want as responding to what they ask for, and say, well, these are the spaces that we have, rather than creating spaces specifically. Because what we've seen over the years is when the needs go, we're left with buildings that are not necessarily suitable for other people to occupy. And so, I mean, I think of all the Masonic lodges, for example, and we left, I think, 1 or 2 in Invercargill. But when I was a child, I think there were about 6 or 7. You know, people's interests change. So it's a bit along the conversation about bars and nightclubs and things. A lot of those are about entrepreneurial opportunities, not for us to provide. Do our bylaws enable is more a thing. But I think Richard's question about, or the discussion about interculturalism and the use of the spaces that we have, perhaps that's not as visible to the public as it could be. And how do we do that without sorry?
It's a compulsory gin in the clubhouse.
It would be difficult. I don't know why I had an alarm for that, but I did. Thank you, sorry. So how do we actually encourage better use of the spaces and places we have in this conversation, rather than invent new ones? Or are we looking for an answer and we don't even really have the question yet? I don't know. It's been a good discussion though.
One of the things that Council looked at in a couple of its previous iterations, we had a lot of focus on events and supporting events, and the theory behind that is if we supported events of various scales, but the larger the better, the economic impact for the town was significant. Evelyn and Richard raise a really good point that there's actually stuff that we can generate within our community that gets people out and circulating as well, which is not just an economic benefit, but is actually more a social well-being, which, bearing in mind what we've kind of devolved to over the past 12 months when people have become, well, frankly, less tolerant, the timing for that's really good for us to be looking at. And again, going out and getting the feedback and finding out, is this a space that people want to see council involved in more or not?
I suppose you look at the farmers market and how that's grown over time, and how that support lots of like groups together. And I'm just thinking, you know, with you even in the sense of, you know, how we sort of all like showcase these other cultures that you were, you know, that we have in our community.
And some of that
Food's
evolved
always
from
the
the
answer.
Multicultural Food Festival, as different ethnicities grew the market for their foods, and people became more culinarily adventurous. I think I might have just made up an England word, but it sounds good. It's got people out and about, and again, it created from something that started at Boys High. Here's a sense of community with people going out on a Sunday to meet around these groups, and we've got 2 markets with people gathering. That's a good thing.
And perhaps a night market, you can combine the two and still have a nighttime economy that's not alcohol based.
And easier to have in winter. But it's more obviously night. Or in summer it's we wish it was night. Or yay, look at us, it's not night. Rhiannon.
Just wanted to mention that this workshop obviously is focused on the city centre, but the next workshop that you guys have put on your priority list is about a broader discussion of community wellbeing. So I think a lot of these themes will kind of continue and come through into that discussion as well. So I think that's the end of our topics for the public workshop.
Right, so at this point, just by way of summary for those who've been joining us on the live stream, a workshop is not a place where we make decisions. You've heard and seen the councillors asking questions, raising points for discussion and consideration. All this informs the documents that the staff will create to bring to us to approve to go out for consultation, and that is for members of the public where we really want to hear what your opinions are on those things. It is a vital part of our decision-making process. Once we've been out and consulted, then we meet, then we decide. That is an open council meeting. So this has been a new experience for us, having a workshop in a public arena, and thank you for joining us for that.